Herkese merhaba. Öncelikle bir duyuru yapmak istedik. Çağan hocamızın araştırmaları İngilizce olduğu için sunumunu İngilizce yapmayı tercih etti. Biz bilim kulübünden gönüllü öğrenciler olarak birkaç gün içinde sunum çevirip kanal altyazı ekleyeceğiz. İngilizce olarak takip edemeyecekseniz birkaç gün içinde aynı linkten altyazı haldeki videoya ulaşabileceksiniz. Ayrıca internet bağlantısı bazen stabil olmayabiliyor. Onun için de kusura bakmayın, hocamız Sarıkamış'ta olduğu için biraz gecikmeli geliyor. O zaman başlayalım. Welcome to the 7th session of the Month of Evolution. As you know from the previous sessions, this year we are holding the annual Evolution Days online as Month of Evolution and going international, collaborating with Evrim Ağacı. We started on Darwin Day, which is 12th of February, and will finish on 13th of March. We are so happy to share this period with you.
If you have any questions during the presentation, just write them to chat. When the presentation is over, our team will ask your questions on your behalf. This year's event is far more meaningful due to the circumstances our university is in. We are grateful to all our speakers and participants for making the Month of Evolution happen in these dark days. At this point, we feel the need to inform you.
We are standing with our friends who got arrested during the protests against the non-democratic rector appointment that happened on 2nd of January. One day left until the classes start, but 17 days left until the trial day of our friends. Right of education cannot be disrupted. We don't accept, we don't give up, and we won't bow down. In any case, we will strive to bring science to you.
As Boğaziçi University Science Club, our goal is to facilitate access to science and accurate information, to spread scientific thinking. Hereby, to contribute to the scientific enlightenment, which is our common dream, as we can. Today, we are with Çağan Hakkı Şekercioğlu from University of Utah. He ranks first in the field of biology on the list of the world's most influential scientists according to citation numbers and H-index. Moreover, he is the only person from Turkey on the fields on ecology and ornithology. We congratulate him as the scientist of the future and want to express our pride.
Welcome again, Dr. Şekercioğlu. You can share your presentation and we can start. Oh, you shared it. Okay, we can start now.
Your mic is muted, Dr. Şekercioğlu. You can open it below the page. There's a segment.
There we go.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
You can start.
Yes, I'm sorry. I have not used this program before, so it's a little. I'm a little rough. So great. Okay, so can everyone see the talk, the presentation?
Yes, we can, but it is not in full screen.
Is it in full screen now?
Still no.
I put it as full screen, but that's strange. Just give me a second.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm going to duplicate it. How is it now?
Still there is no change. Maybe you can unshare and try it again. Yes.
All right, I see what you're seeing. How about now?
It's the same.
Well, I am in presentation mode, so I'm not sure what's...
When you're
Maybe-
sharing the screen, you may share the full screen, not the PowerPoint. I guess maybe it will work.
I guess it is top right bottom. There's a button.
How's it now?
Same.
Still same.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure.
There's a button near the 62% on the right bottom of the page.
This one.
No, not this. Yeah, this one.
Yeah, no, that's what I use. So
We
it's
can
on
start
full.
I
like
guess.
this. I guess.
It's full.
okay.
It's full screen on my laptop.
We are not seeing it in full screen, but we can start, I guess. We still see the slides and everything.
Well, let's try one more thing.
Okay.
No, it's not working. Let me try one thing. Yeah, one more thing here. Now?
Still the
the
same.
same.
No, I don't know. I mean, in my class, I use Zoom and it works automatically, so I'm not sure what the problem is now. I'm sorry.
Okay, not a problem. We can start, I think.
Evet.
Okay. Now?
Still the same, but we are seeing the presentation.
Okay, no improvement, huh?
No, but it's not a problem for us. We still can see everything on the slide, and
Okay.
I guess if you want, we can start.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what the issue is, but I've never used this program before, so it won't cooperate. I think what the problem is, it will not duplicate the screen. Let me try one more thing. I'll try extending the screen. And share again. Stop sharing, share. How is it now?
It got worse, I guess.
Goes. Okay. Never mind. All right. Is it okay now?
No.
No.
Okay.
Okay, well, sorry. I'm in presentation mode and I'm in full screen, so this is the best I can do.
Okay, not a problem.
I know Zoom controls better, but I don't know about this one. Okay, well, I'll get started, okay?
Okay, we are waiting.
Well, sorry about the delay. Never used Stream Share before, but I hope you will enjoy this talk. I do global macroecology, conservation, and biogeography research on birds, and also research on mammals in eastern Turkey. Today I will talk to you about my bird research, especially our global bird research using the Global Bird Ecology Database I created starting as a PhD student in the year 2000. So it's been over 20 years now. And this is the first global database that covers all the bird species of the world. And we still expand it on a weekly basis. And you will see some of the work we've done using this database. Right. As you will see in my talk frequently, I talk a lot about why birds matter. A lot of our research, my lab's research, is on birds' ecological functions and ecosystem services. And we summarized some of this research, not my own and also my colleagues, in this book, Why Birds Matter, co-edited with my colleagues Dan Wenny and Chris Whelan, and published by University of Chicago Press. So if you're interested in these issues and want to learn more in depth, this is the book you should get. And most of my papers are available online as PDFs on ResearchGate, and you can also ask me for reprints through ResearchGate. You can request it, and I will send you the papers if you want to read more about our work. So, why birds? So I get asked this question a lot, especially by the general public. Well, the simple answer is I really like birds and I find them very interesting. I am a bird watcher. I've been one since age 13. And I also spend my holidays and spare time going all around the world, trying to see new bird species. And I've seen over 8,000 bird species in about 90 countries, 7 continents. So that's the main personal reason. But scientifically, birds are also an excellent model system for various reasons. They are the best known class of organism. We know more about birds than any other group, including mammals. Of course, we know more about humans and lab mice, but overall, as a group, we know more about birds than about mammals, reptiles, amphibians, you name it. Birds are also excellent flagship species. They are beautiful. A lot of people, a lot of the public are inspired by them. They are in art, they are in mythology, and they make great flagship species for conservation, for research, for environmental education. Birds are also an ideal model group for studying conservation and ecology questions because they are found in most major ecosystems. And of course, they are also affected by human impacts. So they're also good for studying conservation questions. Birds provide key ecological functions such as seed dispersal, pollination, predation, scavenging. And these ecological functions are very important for the continuity of ecosystems. Bird migrations inspire people and connect landscapes. And as we'll see, nearly about 2,000 bird species migrate and also inspire a lot of people all over the planet. And similarly, with their lives, migrations, color, behavior, birds inspire people, and a lot of people relate to birds and want to study them, watch them, photograph them, and conserve them. And as part of this, hundreds of millions, if maybe billions of people worldwide observe birds. Just in the US alone, there are estimated to be 60 million bird watchers. And as a result, the data collected and shared by the citizen scientists are becoming a globally critical source of data for research, including eBird, which I highly recommend you all take a look. eBird is a citizen science website where you can contribute bird watching data, and you can also use the website to look at bird photos, listen to bird sounds, and also find out where to observe bird species. And this year, eBird is going to reach more than 1 billion bird records around the world. And with my students last year, we analyzed all the eBird data globally to see if the population changes of birds shown by eBird data match population changes of birds that are estimated by professional field scientists. So before I continue, can everybody hear me and see the slides okay?
We just seeing the first slide. We can hear you, but if you are not on the first page, now we are in third page, bird as a model system.
Okay. All right. So I think what's happening is the PowerPoint presentation mode is not reflecting on your screen. That's what's happening, because I'm in the presentation mode and I can see it all. So you can see it now, right?
Evet, we can see it now. Bird as a model system.
Is it bigger now?
Yes, it's bigger.
Okay. How about now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm not going to use the PowerPoint presentation window.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Sorry about this. All this technology, every program has its own problems. I wish they made one perfect program.
It's definitely not a problem. We are very excited to listening to you.
Great. Well, I think now we have a good setup. So, just give me a second.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I can see now on YouTube what you can see, so it looks good. Okay,
Yes.
I think we'll be okay now. Just give me a second. What do you see now? The first slide?
No, we're in the second slide.
Okay.
Why birds matter.
Okay. Do you see it? Do you see why birds matter?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So, and that's all you see. Okay, now I see. Okay, no, this looks good. This is how we'll continue.
Thank you.
Just give me a second. And do you see me as well?
Yes, we can see you. We can see you as well.
I think this is good. This is how I'll continue. Great. So I mentioned our book, Why Birds Matter. So if you're interested in reading more about birds' ecological functions and ecosystem services, this is our book co-edited with my colleagues, Dan Wenny and Chris Whelan. And I recommend you get a copy. And you can also find my papers, find my lab's papers on ResearchGate, or you can message me on ResearchGate and I'll send you PDFs if you can't find them there. Okay, so we talked about why birds are a good model system. And so the main themes of my talk tonight are going to be on extinction threat and conservation of bird species, their diets and ecological functions, the role of specialization and mobility in bird conservation. And I will also talk about two of the biggest threats to birds and biodiversity globally: habitat loss and fragmentation, and effects of climate change. And I will conclude with a brief explanation of the importance of education, outreach, and citizen science in bird research and conservation. Great. So I already started talking about our global bird ecology database. This is something I started as a PhD student about year 2000. And this is an example of what you can do as a PhD student, even without any research funding or even field work. I was doing some field work, but I also was interested in understanding bird ecology and conservation globally. So I thought I could enter the basic ecological and life history data on bird species, all of them, into a database. Of course, I was a naive PhD student. When you're young, you think you can do everything. And I didn't realize this would take years. And I'm glad I didn't realize, because I wouldn't have started probably. So the first version, with the help of 8 undergraduate students and some other volunteers, the first version took about 2 years. And then I analyzed and published this global picture of bird conservation. And since then, with my students and volunteers, we've been updating and expanding this database, adding new species of birds as they're described. And now we have data on about 11,500 bird species from more than 300 books, hundreds of papers. And as of now, we have actually passed more than 20 person years of work entering data. We're approaching 2 million entries on the various bird ecological attributes such as distribution, habitat, diet, conservation status, life history, behavior, elevation limits, and dozens of other variables. So this has led to a lot of papers. I would say about half of my papers, more than 50 papers based on this database, probably about 70 papers now, with the papers in press and in review. And we have basically many other papers in the works, because we can ask hundreds of questions and find answers in this database. So to give you kind of a big picture, this is one paper we did with some colleagues. This shows you the global distribution of bird species and the distribution of different bird ecological guilds, dietary groups. So as you can see, like with most groups, bird species are concentrated mostly in the tropics, especially tropical forests, and especially in the neotropics, which is South America, such as Andes and Amazon rainforests. But there are also a lot of high numbers in Central Africa, Eastern Africa, Southeast Asia, and New Guinea. When you look at different dietary groups, so you should notice a few important things. One is G, terrestrial arboreal insectivores. As you can see, basically the majority of world's bird species are insectivores. And that's one reason why a big part of my PhD research was on tropical forest insectivorous birds and how they disappear from forest fragments. They are very sensitive to fragmentation and habitat disturbance. And the other things to notice, a lot of the nectar-eating birds, like hummingbirds, are found in the Andes and South America. So there's a big evolutionary radiation diversification of hummingbirds in the neotropics. And you should know hummingbirds are only found in the Western Hemisphere, in North America and South America. There are no hummingbirds in the Old World. Every now and then somebody asks me, it tells me they've seen a hummingbird in Turkey, but they're actually seeing a hummingbird hawk moth, an insect that resembles a hummingbird, but of course it is completely different. The other thing to notice is scavengers, such as vultures, reach their highest center of richness in East Africa. And we do a lot of research on vultures in East Africa, especially in Ethiopia with my students, and I'll talk more about them later. And you can also see frugivores, seed dispersers, also reach their highest species richness in South America, the neotropics, while seed-eating birds, granivores, reach their highest richness in East Africa. Right. So that's an idea of where birds are. Can you see this graph okay?
Yes, we can.
You can see the
Evet, we can see
x-axis, y-axis. Okay, great.
Yes,
great.
everything.
Very good. And you can see some of the slides. I have the citation of the paper if you want to read more about this research. So this is based on the first paper where I analyzed this global bird database, and this shows you the distribution of birds that are extinction prone. That means birds that are likely to become threatened, near threatened, or go extinct. And these are IUCN classifications. It's done by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. It's called the Red List. And the different colors indicate different degrees of threat. So near threatened birds are birds that are about to become threatened with extinction. They are not doing well. And then you have the threatened birds that are vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. Those are globally, officially threatened species. And then, of course, you have in black extinct species, which are sadly gone. And for IUCN, the species that are considered extinct are mostly species that have gone extinct after the year 1500, mainly because we know much less about extinctions before that, before the exploration by Europeans of the Western Hemisphere, the Americas, and Africa, and parts of Asia. So we know very few of the birds that have gone extinct. Based on a paper we did with my colleagues, even since the year 1500, we estimated that we know only 1/3 of bird species that have gone extinct. So we estimated that about 500 bird species have gone extinct in the past 500 years, but we know only about 160 of them. The rest went extinct before we even describe them scientifically. So they were gone before science described them. Very sad. And this is for the best known group, which are birds, and it's much worse for other groups that are less known. So what you can see from this graph is bird species that are found in islands, especially oceanic islands like New Zealand here. And in parentheses, you see the number of endemic species in each area. So this is New Zealand. This is Pacific Ocean Islands. This is South Polar Islands around Antarctica. This is Madagascar and surrounding islands like Mauritius. This is Indomalaya. So this is basically Indonesia and Philippines, but also parts Thailand and Malaysia, but mostly islands of Indonesia and Philippines. So you can see a lot of species endemic to these regions, and a high percent of them are doing badly. So basically, the higher this number is, percentages, the worse those birds are doing. So for example, in New Zealand and surrounding islands, more than 80% of these birds are near threatened, or already extinct. And here we are. This is Palearctic. This is the Old World temperate region. This is basically Europe and temperate Asia, not tropical Asia, temperate Asia like Russia and Mongolia and big parts of China. And Turkey is part of this. And you can see we are about 30%. Of course, this is 2004. Now the situation is a bit worse. So about 1/3 of our bird species in the Palearctic are doing badly. And the global average currently is about 23-24% of birds. Well, with extinct species, it's almost 25%. So 1 out of 4 bird species are doing badly in terms of conservation, and about 160 of them are already extinct. And these are the known extinctions. So I'll give you some examples. This is the Madagascar pygmy kingfisher, which is asleep on a branch. It has a head. It's not headless. And it's an example of an island endemic. And many island endemic bird species are highly threatened for various reasons. One is that many islands are small, so these species have small populations. Many bird species on islands have no experience with predators, with mammal predators, because mammals, especially land mammals, never reached oceanic islands. For example, in New Zealand, the only two native mammal species are two species of tiny bats. So New Zealand had no native mammals except two little bat species. But when people come, they bring with them cats, dogs, pigs, goats, sometimes other species like opossums, like mongoose. And some of these are very good predators. They are not native, they are introduced, they're invasive, and they will wipe out these bird species that have no experience with mammal predators. And the worst example are cats. And in New Zealand, many species, and not just New Zealand, on many islands, birds are highly threatened by cats, by introduced cats. And for example, in New Zealand, one bird species, an entire bird species, was driven to extinction, was wiped out by a single cat of a lighthouse keeper on Stephen Island back in the 1890s. By the time the lighthouse keeper wrote to the Museum of New Zealand and sent them specimens of these dead birds, the birds were extinct. And this was a very special species. It's one of the few bird species, songbird species we know, that was actually flightless. They could not fly. They just ran around bushes like mice. The island had no predators originally, so they were fine. They were feeding on invertebrates, insects. But a single cat came, and this was a small population of, we think, a few hundred, 400, 500 birds, and a single cat wiped out the entire species of out of history into extinction. So island birds can be very vulnerable to introduced predators like cats and dogs and mice and rats. So that's the big reason for them becoming very threatened. So this is another example, an endemic gray-sided flower pecker of Sulawesi Island, Indonesia. And Indonesia is the country with the most endemic bird species, almost 400 bird species only found on Indonesia, because Indonesia is a tropical country with thousands of islands. So when you have a tropical forest and you have a lot of islands, you have a lot of evolutionary diversification, high rates of speciation, and many island endemics, but many of these are threatened due to deforestation, habitat loss, and introduced predators, and also by human hunting. This is another example I photographed in Ryukyu Islands of Japan, which are south of Japan, subtropical islands. It's a woodcock found only on Amami Island. And it spends a lot of time walking on the ground, so they're also very vulnerable to introduced predators like cats. Right, so in addition to different regions of the world, I also analyzed the effects of habitat, which bird groups, which habitats are most threatened. And as you can see from here, seabirds are more threatened than any other group of birds. In parentheses, you have the numbers of species which prefer that habitat as primary habitat choice. So seabirds, right now, the situation is even worse. The majority of world's seabirds are either near threatened, or extinct. They're extinction prone. But when you look at numbers of species, by far, the majority of world's birds are found in forests, especially tropical forests, and you can see more than a quarter of them are extinction prone. So that in terms of actual numbers, tropical forest birds are by far the most in trouble. And the third are wetland birds. And we can see that also in Turkey. A lot of our wetlands have been drained, destroyed, converted into agriculture. And in fact, in the last 50 years, it's estimated that 1.5 million hectares of wetlands in Turkey have been destroyed. And this is also the case in many parts of the world. So wetland birds are also more threatened than average. And then this is followed by coastal species like beaches and mangrove forests, grassland species, and grasslands are converted into agriculture a lot. And then it goes down, and birds that are found in deserts and in artificial habitats. Birds that prefer human-created habitats, like cities, actually, not surprisingly, do better than average, like rock pigeons, house sparrows, yellow-legged gulls in our cities, hooded crows in Istanbul and other places. So a few bird species, like about 60 bird species, prefer human-created habitats, and those birds usually are doing well. And to give you an example of some of these threatened groups, wandering albatross is one of the most majestic oceanic, pelagic, sea marine species. And this bird has the longest wingspan of any living bird, 3.6 meters in wingspan. And they live, especially in the Southern Ocean, not far from Antarctica. And they wander the ocean looking for fish and big invertebrates like squids. And albatrosses, almost all albatross species are near threatened or threatened with extinction. And there's various reasons for this. First of all, many seabirds nest on the ground, so they're very vulnerable to introduced predators like cats, rats, and mice. So many of these birds are also island endemics. They breed on islands, so they have all the problems of island species. And also seabirds live usually very long lives, sometimes like almost some of them live as long as humans, but that also means they reproduce very slowly. Like some albatrosses will have one egg every 1.5, 2 years. So they reproduce very slowly. So if they have a lot of mortality due to predation or other problems, like climate change and warming, global warming, it's very difficult for them to increase their populations back to old numbers. Another problem with seabirds is they get caught on fishing lines and nets, especially tuna fishing long lines, where fishermen put kilometers of lines with thousands of hooks on them, with bait, with fish, and seabirds will go try to eat the bait, they get caught in the hook, and then they drown. Another problem is climate change and global warming. Increased warming of sea temperature, especially sea surface temperature, results in a reduction in plankton and fish, especially in cold oceans and cold water currents, where cold water results in an upwelling of nutrients towards the surface, and it increases production of plankton and fish that it provides food for seabirds. When you have surface warming, warming of sea surface temperatures, that results in a reduction in plankton, fish, and you can have starvation of seabird chicks that's just not getting enough food to eat. So basically, you have a group that's threatened by a lot of things: introduced predators, climate change, loss of food, getting caught by humans on fishing lines, and it's very hard for them to increase their numbers once their populations crash. And of course, the biggest group of threatened birds are found in tropical forests. And this is one example I photographed in Peru. This is an area called the clay lick. Basically, a lot of parrots come to these exposed areas of clay, and they will eat the clay. And the clay basically absorbs the toxins in some of the fruits and seeds these parrots and macaws eat. And macaws are the biggest kind of parrot. Unfortunately, a lot of parrot species are highly threatened both by habitat loss, the destruction of their forests, habitats, and other habitats. And they're also threatened by collecting for pet trade. So a lot of people like to cage parrots and keep them at home. This is very bad. So please don't do this. A lot of these parrots are coming from the wild. They are caught in the wild, often in rainforests. But because they're illegally collected and illegally transported, often 90% of them die before they are ever make it to the cities to be sold. So for every parrot you see in a pet store, especially some wild species, often 9 other parrots have already died on the way. So please do not keep parrots or any wild bird or wild animal as pets. Right, so if you are interested in learning more about tropical birds and their conservation, we have another book we wrote with some colleagues, The Conservation of Tropical Birds, that you can also find in some bookstores. Right, so what other factors threaten birds? Well, one of the things that is critical is mobility, ability to cover large distances. And of course, birds have a big advantage because most birds can fly. And because of that, birds are doing better in terms of conservation status than most other groups. And in fact, when you look at the percentage of species threatened and compare birds and mammals, reptiles, amphibians, plants, freshwater invertebrates like crayfish, you usually see that birds have the lowest percentage of species threatened or near threatened with extinction. So you should realize when you're listening to this talk that the picture I show you for bird conservation status is the best case scenario. Birds are doing better than basically any other group. So for all other groups, the percentage of threatened species is higher. So this is the best case scenario. But even among birds, they are not equally mobile. Some birds are more mobile than others. And the birds that have the highest mobility are long-distance migrant birds. Until I did this analysis in 2007, we did not have a very precise estimate of migratory bird species worldwide. And with our global bird ecology database, we were able to see this, and it's basically about 1,800 bird species out of 10,000 when I did the analysis. So actually, most bird species are not long-distance migrants. And these numbers have gone up since then because we've described new bird species. So now this number is close to 11,000. It's about 11,000. And the number of migratory bird species is a little over 2,000. But it's still under 20%. So the majority of bird species in the world, about 2/3, are not long-distance migrants. They are sedentary. They spend all their lives in one location. And as you can see, their conservation status, percent extinction prone, is much higher than the percent of migratory bird species. A big reason is these birds have very limited mobility. Often they will spend their entire life in an area of half a hectare, 50 by 100 meters. And I know this because with my team and students, we radio tracked a lot of these birds, hundreds of these birds from 12 species in Costa Rica with small radio transmitters. And basically, some of these birds spent year after year in an area that was 50 by 100 meters. The same bird we would catch every year, track it for 2 months, and then it would drop the transmitter. And then we catch it again next year, track it in a coffee plantation, and the same 50 by 100 meters every year. So the problem is when you are very sedentary and you live in only this one little location and don't move, if that area is destroyed, you're gone. And that's the problem with many tropical forest sedentary bird species. Once their forest habitat or other habitat is lost, they will not just fly far and find new habitat. They just disappear and go extinct. Migratory birds have a lot more mobility, but they also have their own types of threats. And most species in Turkey are migratory. And the problem with migratory birds is they have to deal with different threats in different places. When they are breeding, they could have one threat, habitat loss or loss of wetlands because of a dam. When they migrate, they are often faced with the threat of hunting, especially in the Middle East. A lot of birds migrating across the Middle East are hunted a lot. Even a bird we put a satellite transmitter on, a stone curlew, 2 years ago in Iğdır, Aras River Research Station, where I work with my team. The stone curlew migrated from Iğdır down across Syria, Saudi Arabia, along the Red Sea, and it was probably going to cross the Red Sea into Africa. Many of the birds we track do this. But before it could cross into Africa, it was hunted by a man and his falcon. He was hunting with a falcon, and he hunted our bird with a transmitter on it. And amazingly, he put a video of this on YouTube, and somehow a student of mine saw this, sent it to me, and we were able to learn about this. And even more amazingly, there was a Turkish engineer working in a nearby area, a power plant or some kind of industrial plant, and he was able to find this man and get our satellite transmitter back and learn the story of this bird. So a lot of migratory birds face their own threats, and because of this, the percentage of migratory birds that are threatened or near threatened with extinction is increasing. So this study we did in 2007. We repeated this study in 2018 with a student, and you can see long-distance migratory bird species went from about 10% extinction prone in only 11 years to about 16% extinction prone. Other groups, their numbers also went up. Sedentary birds went from about 25% to close to 30%, but migrant birds, the percent of extinction prone species increased 60% from 10 to 16. So migrant birds, their situation is getting worse very rapidly. And these other groups are altitudinal migrants. These are bird species that go up and down the mountain in different seasons, but they don't go very far. These species show irregular movements, nomadic species, especially desert species. Sometimes if there is water and food, they will not move very far, but in years of drought and a lack of water, they can move hundreds of kilometers. One example of this are the budgerigars, the little green blue parrots, muhabbet kuşu. Those are actually endemic normally to Australia. They are desert parrots, and they can move large distances in search of water and food. So they are irregular moving species. And these species are long distance dispersers. The young, once they leave the nest, can fly hundreds, thousands of kilometers to look for new places to live. And many seabirds are in this category. And I talked about the problems of seabird conservation. Right. So another factor that increases bird extinction risk is specialization. And specialization means you have very specific ecological needs. You maybe eat one type of food, or maybe you use only one kind of habitat. An example of this are the forest insectivores I talked to you earlier. They're only found in forest, especially tropical rainforest, and they only eat insects and other invertebrates. And many of them have high extinction risk. And this is the first time anybody analyzed all the species in one group across the world and looked at the relationship between their specialization and risk of extinction. And you can see R square is very high, 0.85, very tight relationship between specialization and extinction risk. And this is a very basic index. I multiplied the number of habitats used by a bird species with the number of food types eaten and divided 100 by that number and took the log, and that's the index. So this is regular log. And you can see, for example, if a species uses one type of habitat, 1 times one type of food, again 1, so that's 1. You divide 100 by 1, that's 100. Log of 100 is 2. So the species that are most specialized will have an index, specialization index of 2. And the species that are most generalist will have lower numbers of specialization. So for example, let's say you use 5 types of habitat and eat 2 types of food. So that's 5 times 2, 10. 100 divided by 10 is 10. Log of 10 is 1. And that group, only about 6-7% are extinction prone, but the most specialized group, more than 40% are extinction prone. So you can see more specialized bird species are more likely to be threatened with extinction, and more generalist bird species, for example, gulls, and crows in our cities. They can use more types of habitat, eat more types of food. They have more options. They can often adapt to humans better, so they are less likely to be threatened with extinction. Is everything clear so far?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, because
Yes.
I'm just basically talking to my PowerPoint, so it's very different experience than a regular talk. I'm just talking to the screen here.
Yes,
Great.
sir. Don't
Okay.
worry, we are not lost.
Great. Good. All right, I will continue. So, and when we look at the distribution of world's specialist bird species, not surprisingly, we see that they are also concentrated in the tropics, especially neotropics of South America. So these are the diet specialists, neotropics, central parts of Central and Eastern Africa, some deserts, the Tibetan Himalayan plateau, and parts of Australian deserts. And then when you look at the habitat specialists, it's mostly similar. Again, neotropics, Central America, also very tropical, Central Africa, Southeast Asia, New Guinea, Indonesia. So these habitat specialists are mostly tropical forest specialists, and also the high elevation specialists of Tibetan Himalayan plateau. And when you combine the two, you also see that the highest species richness of birds are mostly in the tropics, in the neotropics, Afrotropics, Indomalaya, and Australasia, New Guinea. Basically, increased specialization means more species can share one area, and you can fit more species into the same area because they each specialize in a different microhabitat, different diet, different ecological niche. So you have higher species packing. So you got more specialization in the tropics, both diet and habitat specialization, which is part of the reason why tropics have just more species richness and more biodiversity. And this one example I photographed in Bolivia in '97. This is a golden-hooded tanager. It's a specialized frugivore like many tanagers, and it's only found a certain elevational band of montane forests in the Andes, in the Andean montane forests. So another way to analyze extinction risk is based on diet and functional group. And this was my main reason for creating this global bird ecological database. I wanted to see which dietary groups of birds are more threatened with extinction. And you can see, for example, big birds that weigh more than 1 kilogram, and again, numbers of species here, about 500 species, are twice as likely to be extinction prone as the global average here. And some of these big birds are scavengers like vultures, and vultures are by far the most threatened functional group. And this number, as we'll see, is now even higher than 2004. Another group that is more threatened than average are the fish eaters, and many of these are seabirds. And I explained earlier why seabirds are highly threatened. And then we got some plant eaters. Many of these are geese and grouse and other big birds that are hunted a lot by people. Fruit eaters are also more threatened than average. Many of these are tropical species, such as hornbills, toucans, guans, chachalacas, and many of these are also big forest birds that are hunted by people. And they are also very important because they disperse the seeds of plants, especially rainforest trees. And invertebrates, insectivores, of course, make the biggest group of birds, and they are threatened not much differently than the average. So when we did this analysis again about, what did I do here? About 11 years later, you can see that the percentage of extinction-prone species increased significantly, especially for scavengers. It went from 40 to about 56% in only about 11 years. Number of raptors, birds of prey that feed on carnivores, it also went up quite a bit. And basically almost all groups increased except granivores. Seed-eating birds actually did a little better in 2015 and 2004. And one reason is many seed-eating bird species benefit from people because they will eat the crops humans grow, like rice, like wheat, like corn. So some of them actually benefit from agriculture, but that's only, a few dozen species. So the majority of the world's bird species are doing worse in 2015 than 2004, and these numbers now are even higher. And one of the groups that is, as I said, the group that is doing worse are the vultures, and this is a cover article we published in Current Biology a few years ago on vultures. And unfortunately, vultures are declining rapidly, especially old world vultures. And when we analyzed with my student and now scientist at Smithsonian Institution, Evan Bickley, we analyzed the reasons vultures are highly threatened with extinction. And these are scavenging birds that are obligate scavengers and facultative scavengers. Obligate means you have no other option. You're a specialized scavenger. And facultative scavenger means you are flexible. If there is food besides scavenging, a lot of these species will hunt, will catch fish, will catch small animals. And then if there's garbage and dead animals, they will also scavenge. So these are flexible facultative scavengers. And some of these are species you are familiar with, like crows, like gulls in cities that feed in garbage dumps. So they can hunt, but they will also eat garbage. They will eat dead animals. So they have a lot of options. So they're actually much less threatened than vultures, which are obligate scavengers, which will not hunt and which will only feed on dead animals. And because of that, vultures are much more threatened, obligate scavengers are much more threatened by poisoning, by dietary toxins, than flexible facultative scavengers. And in fact, this is the main reason vultures are very threatened, especially old world vultures. One example is the drug diclofenac given to cattle in India. And it's a drug humans also take, but in India, because cattle are sacred, they are once they die, Hindus don't eat them, and dead cattle are left outside to birds, mainly vultures. And when vultures eat these cattle with diclofenac in their system, it turns out diclofenac causes kidney failure in vultures and often leads to their death. As a result, vulture numbers in India dropped in the 1990s. The vulture numbers dropped 95 to 99%. Some vulture species, their numbers were reduced by 100 times, and they became critically endangered. They were very common until the 90s, and all of a sudden their numbers crashed. And one problem with a big problem with that is when vulture numbers crashed, the numbers of street dogs, feral dogs increased. And it makes sense when you think about it. Because vultures, when you have thousands of vultures that are eating dead cows, they are very good, very efficient. They can just clean a dead cow in a few hours when you have hundreds of vultures. But when vultures numbers crash, you have more and more dead animals, dead cows, and there's more food for street dogs. So the numbers of street dogs increased. But the problem with that is numbers of rabies also increased in India. And in India, every year, 20 to 25,000 people die from rabies because of dogs. And when the street dog numbers increased, rabies also increased. And this led to an approximately 8,000 more additional human deaths from rabies every year. So nobody could, most people could not even predict this. vulture numbers crash, feral dog numbers increase, rabies increase, 8,000 more people die every year. So you can see the ecological and human life consequences of the disappearance of vultures in India. And this also costs the Indian government billions of dollars of loss every year due to the loss of human life and people getting sick. And the same problem can happen in Africa, because Africa also loses about 25,000 people to rabies deaths every year, sub-Saharan Africa. And unfortunately, old world vulture numbers are also crashing in Africa, also due to poison. And in fact, we are observing this in Ethiopia with Evan and with other students. We have been studying vulture and dog numbers in slaughterhouses in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital. We have camera traps that take photos year-round of birds and dogs that come to eat bones and intestines that people throw out after they take the meat, to sell, and they just throw the rest, the offal, into the backyard for animals to eat. And we've been observing that the vulture numbers have been going down in Addis Ababa, and the feral dog numbers have been going up. And rabies is also a threat to human life in Addis Ababa. So now we are trying to convince the Ethiopian government to do better to protect vultures. And why do vultures get poisoned in Ethiopia? Well, the ironic thing is, often the street dogs are poisoned, unfortunately, very sadly. So to reduce their number. But the problem is, when you poison the dogs and when they die, the vultures come to eat the dead dogs and the vultures die also. But because dogs can breed faster than vultures, by poisoning dogs, you kill vultures faster. And when you kill vultures, there's less competition for food with dogs. So dogs have more food and their numbers actually increase. So ironically, by poisoning dogs, you may actually be increasing the dog numbers by eliminating the competition from vultures, which are highly threatened with extinction. So ecology can be complicated. So you have to think ecologically before you try to mess with the ecological balance. Another critical group for ecosystems, avian bird group, are frugivores, especially the tropical frugivores, such as this chestnut mandible toucan I photographed in Panama. And you can see he's got a big fruit in his mouth. So a lot of these big fruit-eating birds will swallow the entire fruit. They will fly away, and they will defecate the seeds. And many of these seeds have evolved to germinate after passing through the digestive system of these fruit-eating birds. So the birds are dispersing these seeds and helping them germinate, helping them colonize new areas, and helping spread the rainforest plants, especially trees. Right. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Right. So why is seed dispersal so important for plants? Well, there's various reasons. One is that just eating the fruit often helps the seeds germinate. Removing the pulp of the fruit leads to enhanced germination for many plant species. And also moving the seeds to distant places from the parent tree helps those seeds escape from seed predation and competition with other seeds, helps them colonize open sites in the forest with more sunlight, and you could have directed dispersal to better sites, and you have increased gene flow of this plant species. So globally, you have tens of thousands of plant species dispersed by birds. And we did an estimate as a chapter of our book. At least 83 plant families have bird dispersers. This includes 5,000 plant genera, about 80,000 species is our estimate. And this is out of 250,000 angiosperm plant species. So 1/3 of angiosperm species. And most of these plants dispersed by birds are trees and woody shrubs, so they're very important for ecosystems, especially forests. And depending on the region and habitat, you can have 20 to 90% of these plants dispersed by birds. And when you look at it globally, this is what you see. More dispersal, more bird dispersal in the tropics. Starting from Alaska, you can see about 1/5 of woodland forest plants are bird dispersed. In California, Mediterranean chaparral, like maki, like also Turkish, similar to Turkish maki, Mediterranean chaparral. In California, about 1/3 of woody plants bird dispersed. But when you go to the tropics in Panama, Barra Colorado Island, 83% of tree species out of 422 are bird dispersed. In Ecuador rainforest, even higher, 92% of tree species are bird dispersed, and 63% of woody lianas are bird dispersed. And when you go back again to Mediterranean, Chile ecosystem, you have 42% of woody plants that are bird dispersed. So overall, you have higher bird dispersal in tropics, higher percentage in woody habitats, especially forests, and higher percentage in neotropics, the New World tropics like Amazon and Andes, than paleotropics of the Old World. But very, very important, especially for tropical forests. And one example, and large fruit-eating birds are especially important because they can disperse larger seeds that no one else can disperse. And unfortunately, as you know, large birds, large frugivorous birds are more threatened with extinction, and they're harder to replace ecologically. There's nothing like them. And this is my favorite bird, and it's my favorite because it's the only bird that can kill a human being. And it's a southern cassowary, and it's about 1.5 meters tall. It cannot fly. These are its wing feathers, and obviously can't fly. It looks like a kind of a dinosaur, a velociraptor, and of course, technically, birds are dinosaurs. We know this now. They got these long claws, about 15 centimeters, and if you corner them, to defend themselves, they will jump and slash with their mid-claw, and can open your bowels, and they have even stabbed people in the neck just by chance, and those people have bled to death. In fact, one of these captive cassowaries killed a man in Florida just 2 years ago. They are mostly very gentle birds. I actually photographed this one. I studied them in Australia for a while, a few weeks, and they did not do anything to me. And these birds can swallow very big fruits, and can, even though they don't fly, they can walk a lot, and they can disperse these seeds very far. In fact, in one study, people discovered that they could disperse a seed 64 kilometers just by walking. So these birds are threatened by dogs. People's dogs will kill them. They are threatened by cars. Cars will hit them when they're walking across the road. And they're also threatened by the loss of their rainforest habitat. And they're also threatened by hunting, especially in New Guinea. So they are threatened by a lot of factors, and their numbers are declining. And if you lose these birds, some of these trees have such big fruits, no other animal can swallow and disperse their seeds. So the trees will also become threatened with extinction. Right. So how about insectivores? This is the group I was most interested in for my PhD, and I wanted to see, why they are threatened with extinction. And as you can see, in terms of numbers, insectivores dominate avian communities worldwide. So this is Australia and New Guinea, Afrotropics, Southeast Asia, Indo-Malaya, Neotropics, Oceanic Islands, temperate regions, and these are bird species that are cosmopolitan. They are found across many regions of the world, and this is the world average. So about 60% of world's bird species are invertebrate eaters, insectivores, and you can see in different habitats. The second is fruit eaters, frugivores. So especially in the tropics, you have about 10 to 20% that are frugivorous, much lower in temperate regions. Then you have seed eaters, higher in temperate regions, but lower in the tropics. Then you have nectar eaters, especially in oceanic islands and neotropics. These are hummingbirds here. And then you have other groups. But insectivores basically make up about half or more of all bird species. And this is the global average. So they are very important in ecosystems, especially tropical forests. And this is the group I studied for my PhD, tropical understory insectivores. I also studied them for my undergraduate thesis in Uganda. I wanted to understand how selective logging affects understory insectivores bird species in the Kibale forest of Uganda, and that was my university undergraduate thesis. And then I continued my work in Costa Rica, and I wanted to understand why they are sensitive to forest fragmentation. And then after I created the global bird database, we did a global analysis of all studies of forest fragmentation effects on tropical forest insectivorous birds. And what we see is that in temperate regions, actually, insectivorous birds are not sensitive to fragment size. Below you have the fragment size in log. So this is 1 hectare, 10 hectares, 100 hectares, 1,000 hectares, 10,000 hectares. And this is percentage of species in that fragment that are insectivorous. As you can see in tropical forests, as the forest fragments become smaller, you lose insectivorous species. You have a lower percentage of species that are insectivorous, and with larger forests, you have a higher percentage of insectivorous species. In temperate regions, there is no relationship. And when you look at this here, again, fragment sizes here, up to over 1,000, there's a significant effect, positive effect in tropical forests, larger forest fragments, more insectivorous species, but there's no significant effect in temperate forests. So we now know that tropical forest insectivorous birds are sensitive to forest fragmentation, but in temperate forests, birds are more mobile, more migratory, so they are less sensitive to forest fragmentation. Right. So, and as you can see from our cover illustration of our book, these insectivorous birds in tropical regions and other places provide important ecological services. This is an example of a black-throated blue warbler that eats the pests, agricultural pests of coffee. This is a coffee plant, and this illustration is an example of a study by my colleagues done in Jamaican coffee plantations. They discovered that birds, especially this warbler, black-throated blue warblers, eat a lot of coffee pests and save the coffee farmers a lot of money because the farmers don't have to buy a lot of pesticides. So they save them money and they reduce the pesticide chemical use in coffee. In fact, they estimated that my colleague Matt Johnson and his students estimated that bird eating of coffee pests in Jamaica every year is equal to $310 of pesticides per hectare of coffee plantation. So if you have a 1 square kilometer coffee plantation, that's 100 hectares, the birds are saving you $31,000 of pesticide expense every year. And of course, that's less poison in your farm. So, and I can give you a lot of examples. For example, in Netherlands, in Dutch apple orchards, bird control of apple pests increases apple production by about 65%. Again, birds save farmer a lot of money. So losing these insectivorous birds also have ecological consequences and also economic consequences for farmers that will have more agricultural pests. Right. So agriculture makes up a huge proportion of the world land cover, 38%. And of that, a big part of it is coffee. So I've been very interested in coffee during my work in Costa Rica and also even more so in Ethiopia. Coffee, which, I'm drinking now, is grown on about 25 million acres, which is about 10 million hectares globally, mainly in very biodiverse, rich tropical forest ecosystems in mid-elevation regions, mountains of the tropics. So I've done a lot of research in coffee because of this, but I have also studied tropical bird species in forests, agroforests, and agricultural areas. So here, agricultural areas are open agricultural areas like rice, corn, wheat fields, and agroforests are areas that have a mixture of agriculture and trees. And coffee plantations and cocoa plantations, for example, are often agroforests. Some of them have very few trees, but others can have shade coffee with mostly tree cover, and the coffee is in the understory of the forest. So when you look at all tropical bird species, you have about 6,000 bird species that are found only in the tropics. Of those, about 4,500, 75%, are only found in forests. They will not use agricultural areas. About 300 only use agricultural areas. So those are, human adapted. They're adapted to human-dominated habitats. And then you have about 1,200 species that will use both forest and agricultural areas. So by having more agroforests, more trees in agricultural areas like coffee, we could actually increase the conservation of these species, agroforest species, that use both forest and agricultural areas. And when you look at their proportion, you can see that forest species that will not leave forest, of course, are more extinction prone, more at risk, near threatened and threatened. Agricultural species are mostly doing okay because, there's a lot of agriculture and they are adapted to it. And agroforest species that use both forest and agriculture are in the middle. So by improving agricultural areas with more trees, we can improve the conservation, especially of agroforest birds. So, and when you look at the functional diversity of birds in these tropical agroecosystems, you can see that, as you expect, there's a big drop in insectivores. So the birds that feed on invertebrates, there's a reduction in their species richness by about 25%. The birds that eat fruits, frugivores, there's not a big change between forest and agroforest, but in open agricultural areas with very few trees, there's a big drop in fruit-eating birds because you've lost most of the fruit tree species. But you have a big increase in seed-eating birds in open agricultural areas because you're producing a lot of seed crops like corn and wheat and rice. So you can see changes in agricultural practices can result in big changes in bird ecological groups. You, especially when you go to open agriculture, you lose a lot of seed dispersing frugivores, and instead you get a lot more seed eating granivores that could be agricultural pests. So having more tree cover, more agroforests is also better for birds' ecosystem services in agricultural areas. So a big part of my PhD and postdoc research took place in Las Cruces, southern Costa Rican forest fragments. So basically, this was the biggest tropical bird banding, bird ringing project at the time. In 12 years, we ringed and released 265 bird species, more than 57,000 individuals, and we compared forest, fragments, coffee plantations, and other types of habitat. So to summarize this study, you can see our different types of habitat: open coffee with very few trees, shaded coffee with more tree cover. So this is about 7%, this is 14% tree cover. Riparian forests, trees along rivers, secondary forests, forests coming back, primary forest fragments, the Las Cruces Forest Reserve, which is also mostly primary forest, and the huge Amistad National Park that is about 400,000 hectares of beautiful montane rainforest primary. So you can see that the primary habitat of the bird species changes from about 50% forest species to basically 100% forest species in the big national park. So these habitats are becoming better as you go from left to right, more trees and a more primary forest. And when you look at species forest dependence, not surprisingly, high forest dependent species increase from open coffee to Amistad, and also a medium forest dependent species increase. And then the species that are habitat specialists that are found only in one or two types of habitat also increase. You get more specialists in more forested areas. And finally, you get more insectivores, more invertebrate eaters as you go from coffee to riparian to extensive primary rainforest national park. So basically, we've shown in this long-term study that there are still some forest species that are using these coffee plantations, and their numbers increase with more tree cover and more shade. So you can see that they become more forest dependent, and you get more insectivores with even a small increase in tree cover. So increasing tree cover in coffee plantations helps tropical forest bird conservation. And we also wanted to study coffee birds in Ethiopia, which is the home of coffee. Coffee is a native forest plant in montane forest understory in East Africa, especially Ethiopia, and this is where we studied it, in Kaffa province that gave coffee its name, Kaffa coffee. And in this place, coffee is grown traditionally under forest trees of 20 meters, and the coffee plants are about 2 to 3 meters under the forest, and so they are grown as shade coffee, as good as you can get for biodiversity. And when we studied the bird species in shade coffee plantations, native shade coffee plantations, and compared them to intact mountain forest bird species, we found that actually coffee plantations, shade coffee plantations, had more bird species, and they were the only coffee plantations in the world that did not lose any of the montane forest bird species. So basically, we discovered that Ethiopian shade coffee is world's most bird-friendly, and National Geographic did a study on it. So if you like coffee like me, try to get your coffee from Ethiopia or at least East Africa, like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, because the coffee plantations there, the coffee there is a native understory plant, so it's better for biodiversity conservation. And if you can't do that, at least try to get shade coffee, which is also grown in other parts of the world. And this is the difference. This is sun coffee, which is unfortunately most of the world's coffee. This is a monoculture shade, and all the way to rustic, traditional polyculture shade coffee. And Ethiopia coffee is often like this, but much of South American, Vietnamese coffee is often like this. So this is much worse for biodiversity. So I will finish my talk with the effects of climate change, which is of course becoming the biggest threat to biodiversity. And this is our book, Winged Sentinels, Birds and Climate Change, that you can also get if you are interested in learning more about this research. And one big impact of climate change is pushing birds and other species higher and often resulting in a loss of their special mountain habitat. It's an example of a mountain forest sunbird from East Africa, Uganda and Rwanda, and you can see its current habitat and its future habitat in 2085 based on ecological climate modeling. It's much smaller. In many cases, for many species, the habitats are completely gone with global warming and climate change. And basically, in a 2012 study, we estimated land bird extinctions by end of the century based on 5 different surface warming and climate change scenarios and 4 different habitat loss scenarios based on the Millennium Ecological Assessment. And these scenarios go from better to worse based on habitat loss. And you can see that based on different combinations, in the worst case, we could have up to 2,500 land bird species going extinct out of 8,600 species. So you could lose 30% of land bird species in the worst case, climate change, global warming, and habitat loss scenario. And currently, our current situation is around here, unfortunately. Our goal is to keep warming below 2 centigrade, ideally below 1.5 centigrade. But right now, with the way things are, if we don't change anything, we are around here and we are going here. So that means hundreds of bird extinctions, the average being about 500 to 800. And in fact, with the worst case habitat loss scenario, close to 1,500. Even the best case scenario, which I don't think is going to happen, we're talking about 100 bird extinctions as habitats warm and are get pushed higher up mountains, and many of these mountain habitats and their species, their birds, disappear, go extinct. And so I'm going to conclude my talk by providing a summary of what we found. So one of the biggest conclusions is that losses of bird populations lead to declines of their ecological functions and ecosystem services. For example, you hunt hornbills in Philippines. These are real studies we illustrated. A friend of mine here. You lose hornbills, you lose seed dispersers. The seeds, the fruits drop below the parent tree and are eaten by rats and other rodents, so they can't really germinate. You lose woodpeckers, and woodpeckers create cavities that are used as nest holes by swallows and other species. And woodpeckers also eat a lot of wood pests like tree boring beetles. So you also have an increase in tree pests. When you lose vultures, as I told you, you have more rats that can carry bubonic plague, which happened in India. You have more dogs that can carry rabies, which also happened in India. And this is another example. These are all real-world examples. When you introduce foxes to these Alaskan islands, the foxes ate all the seabirds like puffins here, like this horned puffin here. I mean, tufted puffin here. And when all the seabirds were gone, their guano, their droppings were lost, and their droppings acted as fertilizer for grassland. So the island went from tall grassland to short grassland. So the entire ecosystem changed. So losing birds can result in big ecological changes. So to conclude, globally, in terms of birds and other groups, special species are disappearing while generalists are increasing, leading to an impoverishment and homogenization of global biodiversity. Population declines and extinctions lead to the loss of critical ecosystem services such as seed dispersal, scavenging, and pest predation. Climate change is adding to these existing threats, such as habitat loss and diseases, and tropical, mountain, wetland, and river species are especially threatened because of climate change. Mobile species, such as migratory birds, are more adaptable to global change, but they have their own problems and challenges. But new technologies, such as geolocators and small satellite transmitters, enable us to track movements of more species and to learn more about their biology. Understanding how some species survive in human-dominated landscapes, such as agricultural areas, such as coffee plantations, is critical to improve landscape connectivity and maintain biodiversity in agricultural and urban areas. So we need to do more research in biodiversity in such places with a lot of people, not just, pristine, distant national parks. And most importantly, to win the public to the side of conservation, we need to do a lot more education, outreach, citizen science that need to become essential components of biodiversity research and conservation. And as part of our work, we always try very hard to expose students, children, the public to bird conservation and bird research. So we have different bird banding stations, bird ringing stations in Utah, in Ethiopia, in eastern Turkey at Aras River, in Iğdır province. And these places are open to the public, open to the students, where people come, they get to see the birds. And once we measure them, we collect our data, we release the birds. And if the birds are in good shape, and they are almost always in very good shape, we let the children release them, and they get to feel the heartbeat of a bird, and they feel that connection, and they are more likely to become conservationists and scientists in the future. And this is, for example, the number of children, school children, first grade, second grade, primary school, that have visited our Ethiopia bird research station, ringing station here, just in one season. Hundreds of them. And a big part of my work is done with citizen scientists, with volunteers, especially in Eastern Turkey. As right now, just yesterday, we started our spring 2021 bird ringing season, bird banding season at Aras River in Iğdır. And right now, we have 5 volunteers there. And we've had hundreds of volunteers and thousands of visitors and collaborators from 67 countries as part of my research. So I thank them all. And I thank my organization, KuzeyDoğa, and my team. You can see some of them here and here, and they are right now with me here in Kars. I thank them all for their hard work. And I thank my University of Utah Biodiversity and Conservation Ecology Laboratory and my students and staff. And I thank you all for listening. Sorry, this was a little longer than you expected, but I hope it was interesting.
Thank you very much, Dr. Şekercioğlu. It was an amazing presentation that raised some questions.
Great. I'm happy to take questions.
Our team has edited the question asked so far. You can
Great.
still ask questions, by the way. We will forward them if the time remains. So if Dr. Şekercioğlu and the question team are ready, we can begin our question and answer session.
Great, I'm ready. Thank you.
First of all, thanks for your interesting and enlightening presentation. One of our participants asked a good question. It's what would be the short-term and long-term effects of loss of species, and what could be done to stop or slow the decline?
Well, that's basically the question about my entire career. It's I'll spend the next, 30, 40 years trying to answer these. There are many consequences. I gave some examples of vultures, of insects, of frugivores. So unfortunately, I can't go into the detail because I already talked a lot. I mentioned what happens when vultures, the consequence of vultures' disappearance. You could have increase in feral dogs, increase in rabies. Loss of insectivorous birds can increase insect pests and loss of crops like apple, like coffee. There are other examples. And loss of seabirds can result in loss of their guano, their droppings, their excrement. And that can change the plants community of especially islands, small islands. And seed disperser, you lose seed dispersers like cassowaries. You can lose some tree species. So I gave examples across my talk. So if you want to learn more, I have a lot of papers explaining what happens when you lose birds. The book, Why Birds Matter, you can read it. You can read my papers on ResearchGate. My most cited paper is on the consequences of ecological consequences of losing birds. It's about to reach 1,000 citations, so you can find it on Google Scholar as my most cited paper, Increasing Awareness of Avian Ecological Function. So I have a number of publications listing it. And the other question, what can we do? Well, I mean, this is the problem of 21st century, right? How can we stop biodiversity loss? Well, we have to slow down and stop climate change. We have to reduce our CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions. We have to really stop consuming so much, reduce our consumption. Everybody has to consume less. Don't replace your phone. Don't replace your phone every 2 years. Like this is my phone right now, right? This is the phone my brother threw away in 2012. It's not working anymore. Like I have to press the back button like 20 times to go back. So now I can replace it because it literally doesn't work anymore. But so use your phone until it doesn't work. So you reduce your consumption. Get involved. Start your own organization, like we did here in Kars, KuzeyDoğa. Start your own nonprofit organization. Become vegetarian, vegan. Another thing we need to do, like especially in Turkey, we need to reduce street cats, street dogs humanely. People need to adopt them, keep them at home, feed them at home, not in the streets, because those animals, especially cats, are killing a lot of wildlife. I have a dog, for example, and it's adopted from an animal shelter. And before that, I had another dog. It was also adopted from another shelter. And these are old dogs. I love them. They don't, my previous dog, I adopted him. He died 2 years later. I was very sad. But, when he was old, I gave him a good life. Then we adopted another old dog. She was 6. She's now 12, 13. And unfortunately, she's going to die. Then we'll go and adopt another dog from an animal shelter. It's called a no-kill shelter. So the animals at that shelter are never killed. And if people come and adopt them, and if nobody adopts an animal, they will keep them, right? So animals are not killed, and people adopt them a lot. But so I suggest people who love dogs and cats, like I do, they adopt them and they keep them at home. Especially cats. Cats, are happy at home. And if you're going to take them out, put your cat on a leash and walk it, like I do with my dog on a leash. Bring it home. Don't let those animals hunt other animals, especially wildlife. Cats and dogs are not wildlife. They're introduced species. They do a lot of damage to wildlife. That's something a lot of us can do. Get involved in climate change initiatives, conservation initiatives, give talks, educate yourself, educate other people about all the conservation problems. Every person can change the minds of other people, right? If each person changes the minds of 2 people, that's exponential increase, right? Those 2 people can change 4 people, 8 people, 16 people, will change society very quickly. So, I can talk about this all night. There's a lot we can do, but you need to learn more about the problems, educate yourself, educate others, and most importantly, reduce your consumption.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have another question from our participants.
Sure.
Since specialization increases the risk of extinction, how does this affect the evolution of highly specialized species, and in what period can we absorb this change?
Well, yes, that's a very good question. Right. So unfortunately, we are losing a lot of specialized species. So we are losing a lot of evolution. And when we look at the loss of species, we are losing evolutionary change faster than the actual number of species, right? Because we're losing often the most specialized, most differentiated species. The question, so it's especially bad for evolution. And the question, how fast can we observe this change? Well, evolution often works, especially on birds and vertebrates, in thousands or even millions of years. But increasing research shows even for birds, even in nature, you can observe quite rapid evolution in a few decades. One example are the Galapagos Darwin's finches, which of course Darwin used to talk about evolution. And Peter and Rosemary Grant at Princeton University, incredible people who I actually I interviewed with for my PhD when I was interning at Princeton. They've been studying Galapagos finches on Ecuador, Galapagos Islands for, I think probably about 50 years now. And they have observed rapid evolution of bill size, beak size, even in the course of a few years due to drought, right? So drought led to an increase in harder, thicker seeds, and in a few years, the bill size got thicker in some Galapagos finches. So sometimes you can observe evolution very rapidly, even in a few years, a few decades. And of course, it's more rapid usually for insects, bacteria, species that breed faster, evolve faster. But unfortunately, a lot of species, especially specialized species, especially vertebrates, birds, mammals, they simply cannot evolve fast enough to keep up with humans and our destruction of the environment, and they cannot keep up with climate change. They cannot keep up with habitat loss, with global change, which is why we're losing them very rapidly. So that's why I think we are in the middle, and not just me, many people, many scientists, we are in the middle of the 6th mass extinction in the planet's history. In our approximately 4.6 billion year history, we had 5 mass extinctions. Before they happened due to natural reasons. The last one wiped out the dinosaurs, right? 66 million years ago, a meteorite, a huge one, I think the size of Manhattan City, hit the Yucatan Peninsula and led to nuclear winter globally, and all the dinosaurs went extinct. That was 66 million years ago. So when we look at species extinction rates right now, they are estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times faster than the background natural extinction rate. And with the way things are going, we estimated this for birds with some colleagues. By the end of the century, the extinction rate will be about 1,500 times faster than what is natural. So basically, if we keep going like this century, we will definitely have, by the end of this century, we will have the 6th mass extinction. So we have to change our ways because, evolution of most species will not keep up with our destruction of the planet. A few species will adapt, and some have adapted. For example, as I said, out of about 10,000, 11,000 bird species, 60 of them, about 1%, less than 1%, prefer agricultural areas, right? So you can see around you, some sparrows, even house sparrows are not doing great. Rock pigeons, some crows, some gulls, prefer human-dominated habitats, but it's only a fraction. It's like a few percent. The majority, 95% of birds, animals, plant species, do not prefer human-dominated habitats and will be wiped out if we don't change our ways.
We would like to thank you for your kind answers and such an enlightening presentation. And due to time restrictions, sadly,
Sure.
we'd like to point to you another question and then conclude our stream.
Sounds good. And yeah.
While talking about extinction-prone species, what is meant by the number of threatened species and what calculations methods are applied?
Right. So the global assessment is done by IUCN. It's called the Iucn Red List. Google it, and you will see detailed explanations, detailed assessments of every species assessed. Most species have not been assessed. That's a big problem. All birds have been assessed many times. all mammals have been assessed. I believe all amphibians have been assessed. I think most reptiles have been assessed, but the other groups, most plants have not been assessed. More insects, maybe 1% have been assessed. So that's a big problem. I can't remember the number right now, but let me tell you this. Globally, the estimate for world's species, not bacteria and viruses, that's can be 1 trillion species. We don't even know. We don't even know enough to estimate, right? So, but like eukaryotic species, like insects, plants, animals. The most recent accurate estimate is 8.7 million species. So of those, we have described scientifically about 1.5 to 1.8 million. The reason that number is not accurate is some of the species names are synonyms. Two different names for the same species. So people are still, figuring some of that out. But let's say we got 9 million species. We described about 1.8 million. So we described about 20% of species. So we don't even know. We haven't even described 80% of species, right? So and of the species we described, like about 1.5, 1.8 million, we have assessed the threat status of only about 60,000. So, I mean, it's very sad. We don't even know, we haven't even assessed about 1% of world species. So we don't even know how 99% of world species are doing. So we've only assessed, birds, mammals, because, they are charismatic, flashy, and most other things we assess very little or none. So, and the people who do this are expert groups. You could be part of an expert group, right? Let's say you're interested in pheasants, right? There's a pheasant specialist group in IUCN. You write to them and say, here are my papers. Here's my thesis. I've studied the golden pheasant in Asia, whatever. And I want to be part of the pheasant group. And, they have meetings, usually online. They, write back and forth. And you can say, I studied golden pheasant for my master's thesis. And I have some data to show their numbers have decreased 50% in the last 5 years. I think it should be considered vulnerable. That's my proposal. Then other people will provide feedback. Then, at least for birds, a new proposal is open to public comments. So they'll put it online and say, we think golden pheasant, I'm making this up. Golden pheasant is a real species, but I'm making up this example. We think golden pheasant should move from vulnerable to endangered for this reason. Here's the paper that we use to support this. What do you think? You can write online commentary and you can say this, I'm Çağan Şekercioğlu. I think they are doing fine, and here's my reason. You can write, here's my reason. It's like open peer review. But the problem is, for most species, nobody writes anything, right? Because we just don't know. There's usually one person who knows something about one bird species, and whatever they say, okay, we'll do it because we don't know much. And most of the assessments these days are based on GIS. Why? Because for most species, we don't have good population data, right? So who's going to go and count all the golden pheasants in the mountains of China, And golden pheasants are better known than most species, right? I mean, there are much less known species where we know almost nothing about population. You look at the habitat of that species, right? And you look at on GIS how the habitat has changed. If golden pheasant's habitat, based on ecological modeling, has declined about 90% in 20 years, well, there's an IUCN, that meets the IUCN habitat loss threshold, and that will be, I can't remember now, but then you can say, okay, that is a big decline, and that species now should be vulnerable or endangered. So if you want to learn more about how species become declared threatened, extinct, please, 2 sites. Iucn Red List, Google it. And the other one for birds only, BirdLife International Data Zone. So you can click on every bird species and read about its status and why it's considered threatened or not considered threatened. It will give you a justification. And most species of birds are least concern, which means we are not worried about them for now. So it will also explain why it's considered least concern, because it's found in a wide area. There is no evidence of rapid population decline. So we still think they're doing okay. And you can look it up by country too. You can go to the BirdLife Data Zone, choose Turkey, and it will show you most bird species of Turkey and their global status. But one last thing, global status and national status and local status are very different. A species can be globally least concerned, considered safe, but critically endangered in Turkey, right? Because the population is gone extinct. Very good example, demoiselle crane, telli turna. Globally, least concerned, doing okay. The Turkish breeding population is extinct. You know, the famous telli turna of our folk songs no longer breeds in Turkey. And with some people, I think I saw the last breeding individuals in 2005 in Muş, the Blonic Plains of Muş, because their nesting islands were disturbed too much by people. We think that's why they stopped breeding there. And now you see them sometimes in Turkey during migration, but we don't think they breed here anymore. So globally least concerned, critically endangered, and in fact, the breeding population is extinct in Turkey. So national assessments are different than international assessments. You need different national, local teams with local knowledge to do the national assessments.
Okay, we have come to the end of our presentation, I guess. Thanks to Dr. Şekercioğlu again for his answers, and we appreciate his contribution. Tomorrow, Andrew Brennan Pierce, who was Dr. Şekercioğlu's academic advisor at Harvard University, will be with us in the month of evolution. I will now make an announcement in
Say
Turkish.
hi to Naomi. She was my undergraduate advisor.
Okay, we will.
That's great.
I will now make
Andrew too. Andrew is also a very good friend of mine.
Okay. We will make an announcement in Turkish about subtitles. Sunum bittikten sonra kanala Türkçe altyazılar ekleyeceğiz sizin için, daha iyi anlayabilmeniz için birkaç gün içinde. Katılımınız için hepinize çok teşekkür ederiz. Evrim ayının devamında görüşmek üzere. Hoşçakalın.
Ben teşekkür ederim. Çok güzel bir şey yapıyorsunuz. Tebrikler. Kolay gelsin.
Teşekkürler. Hoşçakalın.